Afternoon. My name is Megan Castillo, and I am Town Hall's program manager. On behalf of the rest of the staff at Town Hall Seattle and our friends at Third Place Books, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual presentation of Darren Naish, which is a part of our Arno G. Matulski Science Series. As we get underway, I would like to acknowledge our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continued use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. Thank you all for tuning in online. Town Hall is proud to be a community-focused organization and a place where we can share and sustain ideas and creativity, both in the beautiful Town Hall space and virtually. Town Hall will have new virtual content every week, including our weekly podcast, In the Moment, which features exclusive guests, and many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form in our digital media library. Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming events include a discussion on raising kids to be good digital citizens with Richard Collada and Marjune Morris, and another evening of music in the building with the Bushwick Book Club Seattle. Visit our website to join our email list and get the latest updates as more programs are added throughout the season. If you share in Town Hall's vision for a robust community engaged in the arts, science, and culture where everyone has a voice, please consider supporting us by donating or becoming a member. Visit our website for more information. But back to this afternoon's event. Today's presentation will be about 60 minutes, including Q&A. To streamline our virtual audience experience, we've changed the Q&A platform of our events. To submit your question, please use your phone or computer to enter meet.ps/Naish. We'll drop the link in the chat, and when we get to the Q&A portion, we'll remind folks again where to go. We can't guarantee that we will be able to address every question, but we will try to get to as many as possible. Please keep your questions concise and in the form of a question. For those who would like to view the program with closed captions, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of the video player. The program will be available for rewatching immediately following the event. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our science series is supported by Microsoft, the Norcliffe Foundation, the Nesholm Family Foundation, and Wincote Foundation Northwest. Finally, Town Hall is a member-supported organization, so I'd like to thank all of our members watching from home. Lastly, you'll want to dig deeper into today's topic by purchasing a copy of the author's book. Please use the link in the chat below to pick up your copy through Third Place Books. Darren Naish is an author, illustrator, and zoologist affiliated with the University of Southampton. His books include Hunting Monsters, Cryptozoology and the Reality Behind the Myths, and Dinosaurs, How They Lived and Evolved. His book, Dinopedia, A Brief Compendium of Dinosaur Lore, is the subject of today's talk. Please join me in welcoming Darren Naish.
Well, thank you very much, Megan, for that excellent introduction. And give me 1 second while I hope you can all see my slide, my opening slide there now. I assume you can. So yes, my name is Darren Naish. I'm an author, researcher, illustrator, and paleontologist based in Southampton, Southern England. As you can see from this slide, I've published a bunch of books. The selection here shows some of my favorites, some of those I'm most proud of. Anyway, and I'm also an academic researcher. I've produced a reasonable number of technical studies on dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals. In particular, I'm associated with the early Cretaceous predatory dinosaur Eotyrannus, and you can see a reconstructed skull of that animal in the middle of the slide there. And I'm here today to, as you already heard, talk about my new book, Dinopedia, A Brief Compendium of Dinosaur Lore. It's published by Princeton University Press. It's available at the very reasonable price of $16.95, and it's available for sale from the 5th of October from all retailers. Now, dinosaurs are such familiar animals that essentially they don't need any introduction. And this in itself is a really interesting and crucial point. I think most people, whatever their age or nationality or background, they carry with them a general idea of what dinosaurs are, what dinosaurs were like. And for many people, even today, this archetype or stereotype of what dinosaurs were like pertains to something like this. Now, what I want you to remember is that this view of dinosaurs is decades out of date. And I'm one of many people who's really quite unhappy with the fact that this very old school view of dinosaurs is still being popularized and even bolstered today by a specific film franchise, which I won't be talking about today. Dinopedia, my new book, focuses instead on what scientists currently think about dinosaurs, and more specifically, how we got to our present understanding. What might not be sufficiently appreciated is that it was a specific cultural event which started in the late 1960s and extended throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s that basically caused us to absolutely revise our view of dinosaurs and their world. And this event is known as the Dinosaur Renaissance. And what makes the Dinosaur Renaissance really special and really quite different from the various other revisions of scientific thought that have happened throughout history is that it was conveyed both to other scientists and to the public via attractive, popular books and artwork. This slide shows some of the works in question. So if you're the right age, if you were lucky enough or privileged enough to have access to these works when they were new, then you got to see and experience the dinosaur renaissance as it was happening in real time. I'll be coming back to this theme later on in the talk. It's something that is discussed repeatedly throughout Dinopedia. Now, stepping back for a moment, what are dinosaurs? Dinosaurs are a specific group of reptiles. This is a very simplified family tree of dinosaurs and their relatives. Dinosaurs are part of the major reptilian group Archosauria, the archosaurs. You should basically imagine this as the crocodile bird group. And yes, birds are reptiles from the point of view of scientific classification. Dinosauria, that's the formal name for the group that we call dinosaurs. Dinosauria is what we call a clade. That is, it's a group where all species share the same single ancestor. And as you can see from the diagram here, it's generally been thought that dinosaurs diverged very early on in their history into two major lineages, the Saurischians and the Ornithischians. The Saurischians, this is the group that includes the predatory dinosaurs and also the long-necked sauropods and all their relatives. The Ornithischians, that's the group that includes horned dinosaurs like Triceratops, armored dinosaurs like Stegastauruses and Ankylosaurs, and the duck-billed dinosaurs and so on. And one thing you'll notice from this diagram is that birds, we've got a frigate bird standing in here for birds as a whole. Birds are part of this Saurischian dinosaur group. Birds are dinosaurs. Specifically, they're one of the many subgroups within theropods, the so-called predatory dinosaurs, and I'll be coming back to this point in a minute. Now, I should add right now the point that we're in the middle of a very interesting debate that concerns the way in which the major dinosaur groups are related to one another. So what's shown here, where dinosaurs are shown as consisting of these two distinct Ornithischian and Saurischian groups. This has very recently been challenged, and there are now 2 or 3 competing versions of the dinosaur family tree. I'm not going to be covering that discussion today. It's a very involved, very heavy technical discussion. It's something I do cover at reasonable length in Dinopedia. It's an issue that's caused a fair bit of consternation among specialists and some hilarious hyperbole from journalists. I'm especially fond of the article at lower left here. An article over dino history is tearing paleontology in two, says this journalist. We are in a golden age of dinosaur discovery. This slide shows representatives of groups that have only become known within the past few decades. That's a significant point. There are globally distributed, diverse, long-lived dinosaur groups, whole groups that we didn't know about until, just a couple of decades ago. The horned predatory dinosaur on the left here, this is Carnotaurus from the late Cretaceous of Argentina. It was discovered in, I think, 1984. It's one of the earliest recognized members of a group called the Abelisaurids. They're now known to have been globally distributed during the Jurassic and Cretaceous. We currently know of about 30 named species within this group. The feathery animal with the big hooked thumb claws in the middle there, that's Mononychus. It's an Alvarezsaurid from the late Cretaceous of Mongolia. It's a long-legged bird-like theropod, a couple of feet long, not a very big animal. It possesses numerous specializations for ant and termite eating. Mononychus was scientifically described in 1993, and its group, the Alvarezsaurids, they're now known from fossils found in Asia, Europe, North and South America. There's about 20 species that we've discovered so far. The peculiar winged dinosaur, upper right there, that is Iki from the middle Jurassic of China. This is a membranous winged little tree climbing dinosaur, about the size of a small pigeon. It was named in 2015, and it belongs to a group called the Scansauropterygids, which we've only known about since 2002. So far, we only know of 4 or 5 species. I'm sure, we'll find more of these animals in time. And the spiky-necked animal at the bottom there, that's Bajardosaurus from the early Cretaceous of Argentina. It was named in 2019. Bajardosaurus is a diplodocid sauropod. The sauropods, of course, are the mostly gigantic, mostly long-necked plant-eating dinosaurs. And what Bajardosaurus shows is that, and related forms do as well, it shows that this group, like so many dinosaur groups, actually housed more diverse, stranger looking species than those we consider familiar. I could carry on telling you about recently discovered unusual dinosaurs. There's just so many of them. In fact, most experts, most specialists actually struggle to keep up with all the new names, all the new discoveries. At the moment, we ordinarily see something like 50 new non-bird dinosaur species named in a year. Now, obviously, due to current global events, 2020 and 2021 have been very unusual. Scientists haven't been able to do the field work they normally do. They haven't been able to meet up with colleagues and visit museums and spend time in laboratories and do the scientific work they normally do. But even so, we are currently in week 38 of 2021. And so far, I think it's 23 or 24, because a new one was published yesterday, 23 or 24 new non-bird dinosaurs have been named so far this year. These graphs, don't worry about the numbers, just look at the shape of the slopes of the graphs. These give you some idea of what the shape of dinosaur discovery is like. These graphs basically show our increase, the increase in discovery rate of dinosaurs over time. Time is shown on the x-axis. And you'll notice that you've got, as you get closer towards the present, you've got this real steep curve on the graphs. I think it's something like 90% of all named non-bird dinosaur species have been named since 1990. Now, one of the things that everyone knows about dinosaurs is that many were gigantic. Dinosaurs as a whole were exceptionally good at evolving giant size, and by far the biggest were the sauropods. Quadrupedal, long-necked, generally long-tailed. Even a small sauropod was something like 15 meters long, about 50 foot long, and would have weighed, say, 10 to 15 tons. The biggest, like various of the titanosaurs and brachiosaurs shown on this slide, reached about 30 meters, that's about 100 foot in length, probably weighed over 80 tons. These are by far the biggest land-living animals ever. They're not the biggest animals ever because, okay, the blue whale is bigger, but blue whales aside, the fact remains that dinosaurs excelled at reaching sizes and dominating terrestrial environments in a way that mammals and indeed other animals just never have. Why? Why is this so? There's a popular idea, which as a dinosaur specialist I bump into all the time, that it was the unusual conditions of the so-called age of dinosaurs, properly called the Mesozoic, that allowed dinosaurs to rise to dominance. Unusual conditions allowed them to rise to dominance. That their success was due to the Mesozoic being warmer or having a different atmosphere or having different gravitational conditions or something like that. None of these views have any support. What does have support is that dinosaurs really were exceptional animals, possessing a combination of features that just isn't seen in any other group of animals. And it's this that explains dinosaurian success, and it also helps explain our fascination with them. Put very briefly, right at the start of their evolution from ancestral archosaurs, dinosaurs possessed erect limbs. They possessed a highly acute sensory system, massive eyeballs, good hearing, excellent sense of smell. They possessed super complex teeth, a warm-blooded physiology, an ability to breed young, produce large egg clutches and grow quickly, and a highly efficient respiratory system, which was coupled with a pneumatic system. Yes, a pneumatic system. A thing that's still not that widely known is that many dinosaurs, not all of them, but many of them were highly pneumatic, as in air-filled. A series of air-filled sacs were connected by tubes to each other and to the lungs, and were distributed throughout the body cavity and throughout the skeleton. And as you can see from these x-rays, they mean that in some dinosaurs, like certain of those giant sauropods, parts of the skeleton were composed of about 90% air. Now, this pneumatic system seems quite odd to us. You know, we mammals don't have it, but it's present today in birds. The pneumatic system would have a number of consequences for the biology of non-bird dinosaurs. Because they constantly had huge quantities of air moving around the whole of the respiratory system, they would have been able to push air in and out of the lungs in greater volume and at greater frequency than is the case in animals like mammals. The pneumatic system also means that dinosaurs were probably very good at dumping heat, again, you know, probably more so than animals like mammals. And it might also help explain why dinosaurs were so good at evolving giant size. Their skeletons, their bones were much lighter than those of other animals, and it was comparatively easy for dinosaurs to evolve such things as gigantic long necks. The presence of inflatable sacs distributed throughout the body might also have had major consequences on the life appearance of some of these animals. Now, birds of many sorts have evolved distensible or inflatable pouches and sacs located just under the skin, mostly in the neck and chest. These are often brightly colored. They're often used in sexual display. And caveat here, you know, what I'm about to say is very much an area of speculation, but we do wonder if the same was true of at least some non-bird dinosaurs. In many of these animals, we see bony openings in the skull bones and the neck vertebrae and so on that could well have been linked to the presence of similar display structures. It's quite plausible that many or some non-bird dinosaurs, certain theropods, certain giant sauropods, could well have been ridiculously flamboyant. And this is a point I'll be returning to later on. On the subject of life appearance and bird-like anatomy, we also, of course, have to talk about feathers and fuzz. Now, it's been obvious for decades, literally since the late 1800s, that the mostly bird-like predatory the mostly predatory two-legged dinosaurs, the theropods, it's been obvious that they have some affinity with birds and are probably ancestral to them. This was most famously pointed out by so-called Darwin's bulldog, Thomas Huxley, in this 1877 technical paper. Scientists over the years have often speculated on the possibility that feathers might have been present in theropods before birds evolved. I can remember as a student during the 1980s really hoping that one day we might find fossil feathers on a non-bird dinosaur. Well, this wish was fulfilled in the mid and late 1990s when two feathered non-bird dinosaurs, the long-tailed Sinosauropteryx and the turkey-like short-tailed Caudipteryx, both from Liaoning province in northeast China, they were discovered and both preserve an unambiguous feathery covering. Sinosauropteryx has hair-like fibers forming a pelt all over its body. Caudipteryx has more complex feathers. Certainly the feathers on its arms, hands and tail are structurally identical to those of modern birds, with the same interlocking barbs and barbules that help the feathers maintain their shape. And since those days of the 1990s, about 60 species of non-bird feathery dinosaur have been scientifically described. This slide shows, you know, just 4 of them. There's, like I say, about 60. There's a long list of interesting things to be learned from this. An obvious one is that feathers were not unique to birds. In fact, birds inherited their feathers and virtually all of their other features as well from ancestral theropod groups. Another thing to remember is that the extensive feathery covering that many of these non-bird theropods had mean that in life they would have looked incredibly bird-like. As you can see from these various artistic reconstructions, many of these non-bird dinosaurs would have looked something like archaic long-tailed birds. Incidentally, the animal in upper right-hand corner there, that's Velociraptor. They would have looked something like long-faced ground-dwelling hawks or hawk-pheasant hybrids. They weren't quite like any living birds in particular. The idea, which is still persisting thanks to a certain movie franchise that I said I wouldn't mention, the idea that Velociraptor and similar dinosaurs look like big bipedal scaly lizards is quite offensive if you're a dinosaur specialist. And, so far as I'm concerned, the sooner we move away from it, the better. I find it, quite problematic in terms of what it tells people about our understanding of dinosaurs. The feathers of quite a few of these dinosaurs have microscopic pigment packages preserved. These structures are called melanosomes, and this means that experts have been able to make various claims about the colors and patterns that were present on parts of these dinosaurs. So it's been argued that Sinosauropteryx had reddy brown stripes on its tail and a dark facial mask, that Anchiornis had grey, black, and probably white plumage on its body, limbs, and tail, as well as a reddish head crest, and Microraptor, a small relative of Velociraptor with very long feathers on its legs and feet, as well as on its arms and hands. This was black and iridescent. Now, a lot of these claims made about what the melanosomes tell us about color and pattern are under constant discussion and debate. There's some uncertainty as to how reliable this stuff is, but at least we can say we have some idea about the colors that some of these animals were. That's not a thing that people ever thought was even, possible just a couple of decades ago. These feathered theropods mostly belong to a group called the Maniraptorans. This is basically the group that includes birds themselves as well as all the more bird-like of the non-bird theropods. So it's Velociraptor and its relatives, they're in here. So are the also bird-like Troodontids and the Oviraptorosaurs and so on. What should be obvious to you by now is that the members of many of these groups looked incredibly similar, both in overall appearance and in numerous tiny anatomical details, to the archaic birds that are also part of this group. Due to history being the way that it is, the fact that European discoveries were made long prior to those of Eastern Asia and other places, the oldest known feathered fossil dinosaur, somewhat ironically, is Archaeopteryx, discovered in the Solnhofen, the Jurassic Solnhofen limestone of Germany. It was discovered in 1861. The upper right image there is a life reconstruction of Archaeopteryx, and lower right you can see the famous Berlin specimen of Archaeopteryx. This is the second skeletal Archaeopteryx specimen to be found. I say skeletal because the very first specimen found was an isolated feather. Due to its feathers and due to its proportionally long arms and hands, Archaeopteryx has conventionally been regarded as an archaic bird, as the oldest known member of the bird lineage, a group which is technically known as Aviali. Now, whether this is correct or not remains a subject of debate. It's possible that Archaeopteryx could actually belong somewhere else within the Maniraptoran family tree. But whatever, the more important point here, and the point that I want you to take away, is that Archaeopteryx and other archaic birds, because Archaeopteryx is not the only one, these animals were extremely similar in every detail you could consider to members of these other Maniraptoran groups. So the idea that birds are somehow different or special relative to other dinosaur groups is absolutely contradicted by what we know. If you went back in time to the Jurassic or the early part of the Cretaceous, 140 million years ago, 130 million years ago, that kind of time frame, and if you observed a diversity of live Maniraptoran theropods, It simply wouldn't have been possible to work out which one of those live animals was the bird, was the one that was destined to give rise to birds as we know them today. When birds originated, they were merely one among many Maniraptoran theropod groups. Since the time of Archaeopteryx, birds have, of course, evolved substantially. And within the past 70 or so million years in particular, birds have become increasingly modified relative to other Maniraptoran groups. So animals like pigeons, owls, and crows, they're still dinosaurs, but they're highly modified relative to the ancestral Maniraptoran condition. I don't want birders or ornithologists thinking that the dinosaurian ancestry of birds makes birds any less interesting or any less special. Of course, it doesn't. But the point remains, birds are dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are not extinct. When you look at gulls or eat chickens or walk past feral pigeons, you are interacting with dinosaurs. They're an important group of animals today. They're represented by around 10,000 living species and literally billions of individuals. Now, finding feathers on fossil bird-like Maniraptorans was, you could argue, not necessarily that surprising. But what's especially exciting is that among these recently discovered feathery non-bird dinosaurs are a selection that aren't Maniraptorans. They're not part of this very bird-like group. This is Tyrannosaurus. Again, it's from Liaoning province in northeast China. It's known from two near complete skeletons, both of which are about 9 meters long. That's about 27 foot. It's a member of the Tyrannosaur family, and it's fuzzy. It's thickly covered in a dense pelt or plumage made of thousands of hair-like filaments. So here's proof that at least some tyrannosaurs, maybe only those that inhabited cool or temperate environments, were fuzzy or feathery. As Archosaurian reptiles, dinosaurs, of course, inherited scales from ancestral archosaurs, and we know for sure that dinosaurs of many sorts had scales on their bodies. This slide shows scaly skin known from various Saurischian and Ornithischian dinosaurs. The filaments and feathers that we've seen so far all come from theropods. That's the group that includes predatory dinosaurs and birds. But here's another surprise. We now know that filaments, and it may be correct to call them feathers. This is the subject of ongoing controversy right now. Filaments, fibers were also present in Ornithischians. So that's this big dinosaur group that includes Triceratops, Stegosaurs, and so on. This is Tiannulong. It's a small Ornithischian from the Jurassic of China, and it has filaments or fibers covering its body. It has a mane of especially long filaments along the upper edge of its tail and also along its back and probably its neck and head as well. This is Calindrodromius, another small Ornithischian, this time from the Jurassic of Russia. It has a scaly tail, but it also has filaments of various different kinds covering its neck, body, and limbs. And this is Psittacosaurus. It's an early member of the horned dinosaur family, and it's from the early Cretaceous of China. It's scaly skinned, but one specimen has about 100 long hair-like filaments lining the upper surface of the tail. So it appears that filaments or fibers, not necessarily complex feathers, were widespread across Ornithischians, perhaps being limited to smaller species. If we look at this very simple family tree diagram, well, we know that filaments and feathers were present in Saurischians. You've just seen them in a large number of theropods, and of course, they're obviously present in birds. And you've also just seen filaments or fibers in Ornithischians too. So does this mean that filaments, and again, whether we should call them feathers or not is the subject of debate, does this mean that these structures were ancestral for dinosaurs? Did the very first dinosaur, the ancestral dinosaur species, have a fuzzy covering? What I want you to notice from this diagram is that among the closest cousins of dinosaurs within Archosaurian reptiles are the pterosaurs. Pterosaurs are not dinosaurs, but they're close cousins of dinosaurs. Pterosaurs are a membranous winged group of flying reptiles. They lived alongside dinosaurs during the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. And pterosaurs also are fuzzy coated. We have lots of fossils showing that pterosaurs of all kinds possessed hair-like filaments or fibers, some of which were complex branching structures. And again, some experts argue that these structures should be called feathers, and others disagree with that. It's an ongoing debate. The presence of filaments or fibers in pterosaurs could push the evolution of these structures, filaments, fibers, feathers, whatever, could push them deeper into time, further down the family tree. Was the archosaur that was ancestral to both pterosaurs and dinosaurs a fuzzy coated animal? Well, at the moment, we don't really know what the deal is here. We have various competing ideas. It could well be that these structures evolved independently 2, 3, or even more times. We basically need new fossils, preferably from the early Triassic, from say like about 250 million years ago. We need new fossils that shed light on this issue. This is one of the biggest talking points in the evolution of archosaurs today, and it's a topic that's been an active area of interest across the past 50 years or so. Now, another reason for dinosaur popularity is that dinosaurs were and are especially flamboyant animals. Crests, horns, spikes, spines, bony plates, dorsal scales, and other structures frequently decorate the heads and bodies of dinosaurs. And if we throw birds into the mix as well, of course, birds are among the showiest and most extravagant animals of all. There has been a tendency among paleontologists to interpret these structures as having functional roles of some kind, providing self-defense or working as heat collectors or heat shedding organs. It's entirely plausible that those roles did exist. If you look at extravagant structures in living animals, like say deer antlers, elephant tusks, and so on, they're often multifunctional. But the primary role of these extravagant structures is in sexual and social display. And this is another area that's the topic of a substantial amount of controversy, discussion, and active research. I'm one of a number of researchers who argues that extravagant structures seen in dinosaurs and in various other fossil animal groups as well predominantly evolved under what we call sexual selection pressure. Their main function was to attract mates and deter rivals. Several lines of evidence support this view, but one is that the structures concerned show what's known as positive allometry. This means that they grow at a rate much faster than the general background growth rate of the whole animal. So if you think of, for example, the plates on Stegastauruses, they're small in juveniles, but as the animal goes through its teenage years, the plates suddenly grow at an unusually fast rate relative to the rest of the animal, and the plates have reached full size by the time the animal is at sexual maturity. And if that's the case, if the structures are only fully formed at breeding age, then this suggests a role in sexual display. As I've already said in this talk, we've got good reasons for thinking that non-bird dinosaurs had excellent senses, like living lizards and birds. They almost certainly had excellent color vision. When you couple this with the prevalence of the extravagant structures seen on these animals, also with what I said earlier about inflatable display structures and so on, I really think we have to imagine that the dinosaurian world was a visually remarkable one. Dinosaurs of many sorts would have been incredible to look at. They would have been incredibly showy, brightly colored, flamboyant, prone to engaging in visual display. And on that note, we know from fossil tracks, as you can see upper right there, we know from associations of skeletons, from bone beds, that non-bird dinosaurs of many kinds were social animals, living and moving in groups, forming nesting colonies, living their younger lives in bands with their brothers and sisters. It's, of course, entirely likely that some or even many dinosaur species were mostly or entirely solitary, but as a generalization for the group as a whole, this was a socially complex, highly gregarious group of animals. And it's really fun to imagine their life cycles, their annual breeding events. This is a rich and exciting view of the Mesozoic world. but it's also a frustrating one because there's so much that we'll just never know. We can only speculate on the relationships that must have existed within dinosaur groups, between competing and even cooperating species. We really should assume, based on what living archosaurs do, we should assume that non-bird dinosaurs used a complex array of postural signals, that they were noisy and highly communicative, that their mating and courtship systems were complex, and so on. There's just so much that we're left guessing about. Now, as I said right at the start of this talk, it was a key cultural event, the dinosaur renaissance, that drove virtually everything that's happened since the late 1960s. One thing I've aimed to do in Dinopedia is not just review our knowledge of intellectual events like the dinosaur renaissance, but also to step back a bit and reevaluate the conventional narrative that's always given on the subject. The normal story is that Yale University PhD student Robert Bakker realized during the late 1960s that the way in which dinosaurs were being portrayed was fundamentally wrong. And in a series of papers and popular articles, Bakker argued that dinosaurs of many kinds, even the gigantic ones, were athletic and fast moving, that the long-necked sauropods were terrestrial and not swamp dwellers, that birds are dinosaurs, and that everything about dinosaur anatomy, bone structure, feeding behavior, and even community structure and evolutionary tempo demonstrated warm-bloodedness for dinosaurs. In short, dinosaurs were one of evolution's greatest success stories. Bakker's claims were controversial. They challenged the mainstream views of the time, and they were exciting, and they encouraged a huge amount of discussion and arguing. In 1969, the North American Maniraptoran Deinonychus was described by John Ostrom. That's Bakker's PhD supervisor, and Bakker produced this iconic reconstruction of Deinonychus for Ostrom's main technical study of this dinosaur. Deinonychus was so amazing. It was highly agile, fast-moving, relatively intelligent, bird-like theropod with formidable claws on both its hands and feet that it immediately became the poster child for Bakker's message for the dinosaur renaissance in general. All of this work, all of these studies and articles attracted journalists who started writing about the dinosaur renaissance in popular scientific venues like Scientific American, National Geographic, and also in various books. Now, the narrative that I've just provided basically pins everything on Bakker. This is a heroic narrative with Bakker basically functioning as the lone maverick or heretic who's driving everything that happened. I think all of this is undeniably true. I absolutely agree that Bakker's writings had a huge influence and that his published works, his statements and his illustrations were crucial. But I think that there is actually a larger, more nuanced story which has kind of been overlooked. And this is that the timing of the dinosaur renaissance was ultimately linked to 20th century history as a whole. In order for scientific claims to be made, you need the relevant materials. In the case of paleontology, that's fossils. And you also need researchers of the right age, who are at the right position in their careers, who are in the right economic and social situations to study those materials and make conclusions based on them. The idea that the ideas that Bakker and Ostrom too promoted were mostly based on fossils that had been discovered in the decades following World War II and were mostly being studied by a post-World War II community of scientists who, due to improving economic and educational settings, were increasingly able to engage with these fossils and their implications. I'm aware that not all the fossils shown on this slide are post-World War II, but things like dinosaur feeding behavior, the origin of birds, dinosaur bone structure, these had actually always been the topic of active research. It's just that there was comparatively little of this research happening prior to the 1960s and 70s. So rather than the Renaissance being due to Bakker's claims alone, it's perhaps more accurate to interpret things as a kind of perfect storm of events. I put it that this change in our understanding of dinosaurs, it would always have happened even without Bakker. It's just that it would have been a far slower moving, less journalistic kind of event. Are we still in the dinosaur renaissance or has it finished? That is a very good question. There are different views on it. I'll discuss it in the book. On to my final point, and it's one that it kind of doesn't need saying because it's so obvious, but I also think it kind of does need saying because paleontologists tend not to say it enough. And this is that the impact of art and artists has been crucial in our changing view of dinosaurs. Almost every single piece of dinosaur themed news conveyed to the public is accompanied by attractive artwork. Art depicting ancient animals is called paleo art, and there is today a substantial global active community of paleo artists, very visible on social media. There's no denying that it's scientific advances, scientific discoveries, tedious, detailed, time-consuming, labor-intensive work, often involving cutting-edge tech and statistics and software, that gives us the detailed view of dinosaurs that I've been discussing in this talk. But when it comes to the things about dinosaurs that make them especially exciting, their overall life appearance, their interactions with each other, how they fitted into the environments they inhabited, it's not the detailed technical stuff that grabs our attention. Instead, it's attractive, often colorful artwork, which depicts dinosaurs as vibrant, active, living animals. And I would go as far as saying that probably the most important driver of interest in dinosaurs is paleo art, and that among the most important people in the dinosaur research community are artists. In Dinopedia, I talk quite a bit about American artist Greg Paul, because Paul really has to be considered responsible for the modern look of dinosaurs. Paul's work involves the creation of color paintings like those you see here, as well as highly detailed black and white drawings, but also the production of these kind of high fidelity skeletal reconstructions. Incidentally, it's these that were used in designing the look of the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. And of course, Jurassic Park, released in 1993, had a massive influence, not just on the history of cinema, but on public interest in dinosaurs in general. A substantial number of people working on dinosaurs today state that their interest as younger people was the result of watching this film. This basically serves as a good point on which to end. Perhaps another thing that makes non-bird dinosaurs so fascinating and alluring is that there's all this excellent science that's done on their fossils and on the pattern of their evolution, but at the same time, there's this substantial artistic contribution to how we depict them, how we portray them. Even if you're not that interested in things like the detailed anatomy of brain cases or how we reconstruct family trees, dinosaurs very much have a wonderful, spectacular aesthetic, a point which makes it ironic and annoying when there are projects that go out of their way to make dinosaurs look ugly or dull. And yes, I'm referring to that movie franchise that I want to mention again. As I hope is obvious by now, your take-home points from this talk should be that dinosaurs were truly spectacular, amazing, visually flamboyant animals, that birds are one of the many dinosaurian groups, that we're in a golden age of discovery when huge numbers of new dinosaur species are being discovered on a regular basis, that the history of dinosaur research is very much connected to events in human history, and that part of the reason for our fascination with dinosaurs comes from their depiction in art and is therefore connected to our sense of aesthetics. Our interest in them is not purely scientific. I'll finish by reminding you that all of these issues and much more are discussed in my new book, Dinopedia. Please do buy a copy. It's a small, attractive, very affordable book. If you do buy it, I hope you enjoy it. And that brings things to an end. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you want to take a couple audience questions?
Or... I'd be happy to. Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, let's do that. Thanks for that. That was fascinating. A couple of questions that came in from our audience. A question about extinction. What caused the extinction of non-bird dinosaurs?
Well, the evidence that we have for this bolide collision, this giant rock from space, whether it's a comet or an asteroid, the evidence that it happened is outstandingly good. so about 65.5 million years ago. We increasingly talk about it happening 66 million years ago because geologists round up. 66 million years ago, a giant rock from space between 10 and 20 kilometers across hit the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico and basically collided with the Earth, unleashing a force equivalent to that of about 100 million human-made nuclear weapons. We've got outstanding evidence that this happened. We've got obviously the Chicxulub crater itself. We've got superheated rock particles. We've got overturned sediments. We've got evidence for giant tidal waves that swept out from the event. We've got evidence for gigantic wildfires that erupted across North America. And I say North America rather than South America because our South American latest Cretaceous fossil record is just not as good as that of North America. And basically, this is easily more than enough to create a global catastrophe, ultimately over probably centuries. You're talking about the collapse of global food webs, the total collapse of ecosystems. And the only things that survive are small, highly mobile, and are able to feed on detritus and stuff like that. So big animals that are high up in the food chain, like big herbivores, large predatory animals, they are going to die. So dinosaurs survived. I like the fact that the questioner said non-bird dinosaurs. Thank you. Birds survived because the several bird groups that made it through were all small, extremely mobile generalists, animals that are able to make a living from, picking at carrion and eating seeds and whatnot. But otherwise, you're talking about a massive collapse of food webs due to this catastrophic event.
Very, very interesting stuff. Our final question is also specifies non-bird dinosaurs, but I'm asking about how they mated. So I think that's a good question to leave it on.
How they mated, it's a thing that interestingly you often see it framed in people saying, why aren't paleontologists thinking about dinosaur sex? Why aren't they considering, given their remarkable sizes and unusual body shapes? In actual fact, dinosaur experts have probably considered dinosaur mating posture like almost too much. There's literally whole books written about it. There's certainly some fairly good popular and technical articles written about it. Dinosaurs are so diverse that I wouldn't want to generalize. You can't just say one thing fits all. In general, animals like predatory dinosaurs and most of the dinosaurs of standard body shapes, they would have mated in the way that you imagine. So the male, pins the female down, gets on top of her. You've basically got their cloacae, that's the openings for the sexual parts and also openings for the gut. They've got to get those two aligned, so the male has to kind of curve his tail around underneath the female's tail. Pretty basic stuff, not that different from the postures adopted by lizards, crocodiles, and many birds. When it comes to the giant sauropods, they presumably did the same thing. They just would have had to be very careful about it because they were so large. I'm not going to talk about the actual sexual organs of these animals because that's like a whole nother subject. I'll talk about that for too long. But males would have had an extrusable organ. We say that based on what you see in living archosaurs, crocodiles, and the birds that are diverged early in bird history. Finally, what about the difficult shaped dinosaurs, the sort of top of the list of stegosaurs? How did stegosaurs mate? Well, we don't know, and there's a bunch of possibilities. One is that they didn't, and they actually were parthenogenetic. They were able to reproduce without mating. That's very unlikely, but it's not impossible. Another one is that they adopted a pose that we don't consider as typical. For example, that say females lay on their side and males straddle them in an unusual way. Another possibility is that they mated sort of face to face, came up to each other like that. And another one is that they had enormous and extremely flexible organs. And I'll leave you with that thought without elaborating on it any further, as I think is probably appropriate. But it's a very good question and one we do think about a lot. Which sounds wrong. I didn't mean it to sound weird, but yes, it has been considered at length.
I actually just got another great question from the audience about migration. So birds are known for their migration across long distances with the seasons. What evidence in the archaeological record exists which would suggest that dinosaurs would have exhibited the same behavior, and which well-known dinosaurs might have been migratory?
Yes. I have to correct the mention of archaeology there. Archaeology is human stuff. Paleontology is the deep time stuff. But People have often thought, based on the distribution of some dinosaur species, these animals may well have moved, north to south, east to west, in time with the seasons. Partly this has been inspired by the fact that people have found certain kinds of dinosaurs like way north in the north slope of Alaska, an area that was deep inside the Arctic Circle. So the thinking has been presumably these animals wanted to get away from that during the winter. So based on birds, but also on large plant-eating mammals today, like obviously caribou in particular. Paleontologists have often suggested that migration was normal for these animals. This is, however, speculation, and at the moment a lot of the evidence is against it. So the idea, for example, that these North American ones needed to get away from the Arctic Circle is not supported by the fossil record. The fossil record shows these animals living and breeding like year-round in the Arctic Circle, like staying there during the polar winter and breeding there. We've got like eggshells and little bones of babies from these parts of Alaska. However, we do think that a large number of dinosaurs, including certain sauropods, certain I'm trying to think which other group it's been established for, but for some sauropods in particular, people have said, could these animals have migrated? How would we test it? Well, we can look at the chemical signatures, the different isotopes they have preserved in their teeth. And these do seem to show the animals having like strongly different isotopic signatures indicating that they moved great distances. Given that, the thing about dinosaurs, non-bird dinosaurs, they're around for like 160 million years. They're present worldwide. They're living in all kinds of different conditions, all kinds of different environments. There's no way that it's like, one rule goes for all of these species. Basically, everything you can imagine must have happened at some time. So I don't doubt that some were migratory. A lot of the speculations, as I say, probably aren't valid, but in some cases, some species probably were. Can we demonstrate it? Well, as I said, the isotopic evidence so far is the best thing. So it's a good question.
Fantastic. I believe that is our last question from the audience. So I just, on behalf of Town Hall, thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating and fun afternoon for us. And thanks for spending your evening with the Town Hall audience here in Seattle. Once again, you can pre-order your copy of the book from our partner bookseller at Third Place Books. The link is in the chat of the video. And again, Darren, thanks so much and have a great evening.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you and bye-bye.